War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. With these chilling words, George Orwell ushers in a dystopian era of his 1984. This was written in 1949, and oftentimes its themes of government surveillance and privacy, the loss of individualism and conformity, have chilled audiences for decades. Was it just a story, or is it possibly prescient for our time as well? Hi everyone, I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem, and this is my non-spoiler and spoiler-filled review of George Orwell's 1984. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. I'm a composer, now also a booktuber. You can find my music in The Wheel of Time Season 2 and 3, His Dark Materials Season 3, and the newly released Blessed Be the Eternal, the Edan Trilogy main theme for Philip Chase's fantasy trilogy. So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a spoiler-filled and spoiler-free review of 1984. Why? This book has been out for like 70 years, right? Why do we need another review about 1984? Well, it's interesting how life works. Art reflects onto life, life reflects back onto art, and it can be a cycle, a dance. And I've found that that can be the case with books that tackled prescient themes about humanity, because it's not really just about the year 1984 that George Orwell prophesized. It's not even about the year 1949 when he first wrote it, and it's not even about 2025. It's about the timeless struggle for control that humans enact on one another and the kind of fallout that happens as a result. So it's a cautionary tale. It's a tale of a future that we don't want to be heading towards, but also are we compelled to to head towards it because of the nature of humanity? So that's kind of what I wanted to explore today in the case of this review. So if you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. And now on to the book. Let's first talk a little bit about what 1984 is about, because again, it's oftentimes touted in popular culture. It's become a part of the cultural lexicon, right? It becomes a little cliche. You start to hear these things about government surveillance, Big Brother's always watching. You think you know what the novel is about. Well, I feel so bad that it took me this long to read this book, because reading it made those truths hit home so much more devastatingly. So let's talk a little bit about it. 1984 by George Orwell is a dystopian novel set in a totalitarian society ruled by the oppressive party, led by the mysterious figurehead Big Brother. Now the story follows Winston Smith, a low-ranking member of the party who works at the Ministry of Truth, where he alters historical records to fit the party's narrative. The society is under constant surveillance, and individual thought is suppressed through strict control, propaganda, and the invented language newspeak. Winston becomes increasingly disillusioned and begins to secretly rebel against the party, seeking truth, freedom, and personal connection in a world where both are dangerous. And that brings us to 1949's George Orwell's 1984. So this book hit me really hard, you guys. I have not read a book that captures the themes of government surveillance or the loss of privacy or the loss of individuality in quite a stark way that George Orwell portrays this dystopian future in this book. And I made the mistake of kind of dismissing it because, classics end up becoming cliche when you hear about them so much. And you think, okay, it was written in 1949, probably tamer compared to today's audiences. I'm here to tell you that is not the case. I was left staring at a wall blankly for like half an hour after that book ended, and I almost wanted to start it again, even though it was devastating to read. So let's talk about this in a spoiler-free and then spoiler-filled kind of section. And I felt compelled to talk about this book because, I don't have too many reviews on this channel, and that could change. So you let me know if you'd prefer to see more reviews on the channel. Happy to do more. But this book really meant a lot to me, and it's already in contention for Book of the Year. And this is only March that I'm taping this. So you get an idea of how strongly I feel about this book and how I feel like more people should read it, especially for the times we're living in. So I'm going to divide this into spoiler-filled and spoiler-free sections, starting with the spoiler-free, and I will delineate and let you know a warning before we start any spoiler-filled content in case you want to read it and experience it for yourself. Because I gotta say, I knew the little terms that, I'd heard about Big Brother's watching and everything, but I'm really glad that the plot points were not spoiled for me, because it made the arc of Winston, from where he starts and where he ends up, that much more poignant and powerful. So I want to make sure you know that. So let's talk a little bit about 3 of the themes that are kind of explored and how they're explored in the books. So keeping the spoiler free and kind of high level at the beginning. First of all, there's the idea of government surveillance and privacy. Now, in this particular world, there's a dystopian society where there is always an eye on everybody, being able to figure out everything that they're doing at any given time. Not only that, they're able to figure out if you have any unsavory thoughts towards this oppressive party, towards the government, towards control. So they can kind of control people before anything would happen, right? They can kind of quell any potential rebellions and that kind of a thing. If you think of the movie Minority Report, the pre-crime division in that kind of feels a little bit like that, right? It's like when you think of a crime, it will make make short order of you, right? So what constitutes a crime in this particular world? Well, not only just doing something that is against the party's interests, but also thinking it. So there are what they call telescreens that are able to kind of monitor you at any given moment. And there's the thought police that are able to kind of figure out when you're thinking these unsavory thoughts. So pretty horrifying kind of a world that they live in. Now, of course, maybe if you read this in 1949, it was fresh off the heels of World War II, and the idea of manipulating information to commit some horrible deeds was very much on people's public consciousness. But, a lot of the futuristic stuff that is in this book, you don't think, oh, that's necessarily going to happen. Well, we live in a point now where misinformation is kind of the norm, right? Where people are able to manipulate each other. People, no tweets or no things that are on the internet are deleted, right? And they kind of still exist somewhere. They're able to be traced and tracked. And so, even if you're not acting on information or things that you're doing, you are being tracked to some degree, right? Government surveillance has become that much more prevalent, and loss of privacy has with the data sharing and all that kind of stuff. So, and, with AI, there's going to be a lot more of that, right? There's going to be a lot more misinformation, a lot more loss of privacy. So I really feel like the themes that are tackled in 1949 really hold true today. And it really does beg the question, it's like, is humanity kind of compelled to always want to have the lion's share of power for a select few at the expense of the many? I mean, you think about, this is really a tale as old as time, right? People wanting to lord power over themselves. Well, what's the new currency today is data, is controlling someone's privacy, right? Isn't that the new currency of today? So, I think it's interesting how humanity has still followed suit, even with the disturbing events that are very laid out clearly in this book. The second thing I want to talk a little bit about more is the manipulation of truth. So, like I mentioned, misinformation is such a huge part of today's problems, right, in society. Manipulation of the truth can be used to guide entire countries' way of thinking and things like that. Now, as I talked about a little bit at the beginning of this video, Winston works at a particular place called the Ministry of Truth, which is a very ironic name, right? Because the job is to be the truth as the party sees it. So any particular they call it like a doublethink, I think it was called. But basically anything that goes against what might be considered, an individualistic thought, like anything that is a reflection of individualistic thought is kind of brushed over. New language is invented to replace the old language called newspeak. So this is not spoiler filled in this section. I'm just kind of trying to keep it high level. But there's a character in the very beginning of the book who talks about the wonders of being able to take words and distill it down into one word, thereby eliminating words from the dictionary and from public consciousness, so you only have one word to describe something. Now, that doesn't seem on the outset like a terrible thing, right? It might be in the cause of efficiency. But what does that really mean? Well, what if you wanted to say something is beautiful? What if you wanted to say it was awe-inspiring? What if you wanted to say it was motivating? There's many different words that you could say to describe the beauty of this particular thing, this idea, whatever it is. But if you don't have those words in the public lexicon, well, then do you have inspiration? Do you have the meaning of motivation? Right? You could take those out and suddenly people don't even have that. And they don't even know that they can. And you distill this down over generations and generations. People are not even growing up with the concept of motivation, with the concept of inspiration. So of course, what is that going to do to a society? Make them all lemmings, right? Make them follow suit, conform. So really, really terrifying. And the way George Orwell writes this stuff is really interesting too, because he kind of talks about everything in a very modern language. It's almost like he's looking kind of forward. It doesn't sound like it was written in the 1940s. Sure, there are certain technological aspects of it that are like, okay, we went in a slightly different direction than what's being displayed here, but so much of it is still quite ahead in our future, in terms of like the technological advances, that it still feels futuristic reading it today. So incredible wording. But that is the second kind of theme that I guess you could say is explored in this book. I would say the third one is the loss of individuality and conformity. And it kind of is leading from the first two, right? So if you have government surveillance and loss of privacy, if you start to lose your concept of the truth, and you don't even know why you're here, what you're supposed to be doing, how you were born, how you came to be, then your memories start to become a little shoddy too, don't they? If there's a whole idea in the book that is like the future, the past doesn't exist. It's only about now and the future, right? So if that is the case, then you can't learn from history. You can't learn from the past, and you'll be doomed to repeat it, and you won't even know. You're just living day to day. You don't really have an idea. Now, as you could probably tell, Winston is the main character of the story, and there's a sense that he is a little bit different from the other people. So does he have the capacity to wake up from this walking nightmare that everybody is experiencing, and maybe kind of figure out a way out of this? Is there a way out? What lies on the other side of the Ministry of Truth, right? So that's kind of the ideas that are explored in this. And I think, like, again, you think about where we are as a society right now. Societal pressure, algorithm-driven kind of echo chambers that have gotten more and more fomented during the last 10 years or so as social media 2.0 has kind of taken over, right? Where is that going to go further from here? Do we have any checks and balances to kind of make us stray away from that edge? So it really gets you to ask these poignant questions. That's why I feel like this book is amazing. But it's not just that, it's the way that George Orwell describes this stuff. He kind of gives it a clinical, almost like cynical presentation of the information, where you almost feel like you are in Winston's shoes. You are in the society's shoes. And he's able to do this in a way that I haven't seen with a lot of the classic authors, in a way that would translate to modern day. So I was just blown away by how great it is. And it packs a punch. It's only like 300 something pages. It's not a very long book, but somehow it is able to take all these grandiose themes and distill it into the characters, of which there are few in here, as they kind of make their way through this dystopian world. So before we jump into spoilers, I kind of want to talk a little bit on a high level of what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. Of which, spoiler alert, there's very few I didn't like about it. What I liked about it was easy to read and understand. I think, a lot of classic literature is written in a specific way, in a specific language, that it takes a longer time to really gloss over what you're reading and understand. It's very different to how modern books are written. I did not feel that way with this. I also feel there are certain authors like Arthur C. Clarke and others that kind of came out at a similar time, that the couple ones that really do feel like they are timeless, and this is one of them. So I was just very taken aback by how great the writing is in this. The second thing I would say that I really enjoyed is how close to the truth it is, and how it makes you kind of question humanity's progress. Like, have we progressed? We've progressed technologically, but have we kind of pushed ourselves closer to the edge? So it makes you ask those questions. The third, I thought the pacing was phenomenal. It's divided into kind of a 3-act structure. So you see Winston going about in the Ministry of Truth. And again, keeping it spoiler-free, the second act is kind of a change of tone. Let's put it that way. And then the third act is this kind of a final, poignant and brutal take on everything that has transpired up to that point. So it is divided in a specific way that allows you to be paced very appropriately, even in a 300-something page novel. And while all these different words and language ideas and kind of technological ideas are introduced, it's kind of peppered throughout so you don't feel like you're getting too much information all at once or that it becomes overwhelming. It is overwhelming, it is oppressive, but for a very different reason, and that's kind of in that third act. George Orwell does not shy away from the devastation of it when control can become so total, so complete that you are not even able to, it's almost like you are, let's put it this way. Let's say you're in a tunnel. Let's say you've always been in a tunnel. You don't even know there's a world outside that tunnel, right? Now, what if the tunnel keeps shrinking and shrinking? And what if your understanding of the past keeps shrinking and shrinking? Well, then you just think the tunnel's always been this small or this small or this small, right? You don't think about the fact that it was once larger and grew smaller. You don't think about that there's a world outside this tunnel. So really, really interesting stuff. I would say that third act is very harrowing. There is no like violence in the overt kind of grotesque way to speak of. There are torture kind of scenes and things like that. So I will say just, keep that in mind. But it is just a phenomenally written book. So let's talk a little bit about, before we jump into spoilers, let's talk a little bit about what I didn't care for as much about this book. And I'm going to try to keep it brief because it's a little hard to describe without telling you spoilers. But basically, the only thing I would say that kind of hurt to read, I guess, is that it's just not an enjoyable read in the same way that, a beach read would be, right? This is not a book that you read to go, oh, I want to have a blast, You are left feeling a little empty inside. You're left feeling a little bit like, is humanity doomed to this future? Because, this is a reflection of humanity. Is this completely just a fantasy? Or is this something that is a reflection of our primal instincts that we're afraid to admit to ourselves? It kind of gets you to ask that question. That's not a fun question to answer, you guys. So sitting there and trying to process the events of what I read, that was a really tough thing to do. But I gotta say, I'm really glad I read it. Okay, so we're gonna get into spoilers now because I think there's no way to kind of get around some of these. So spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so as I mentioned, Winston obviously has been going through the Ministry of Truth, and one day he kind of wakes up and he looks around and he says, is this it? At the same time, he meets Julia, who is kind of becomes his love interest and is also, against the party, let's say. And so they end up hearing about the secret brotherhood that might be some resistance movement that is trying to take down Big Brother, right? They meet this character named O'Brien, who's an inner party member they suspect to be someone who is part of the resistance. And they kind of try to do a test, but there's no way to really test it without just going out and saying it. O'Brien, thankfully, ends up being one of the inner party, or so they think. So Julia and Winston in Act 2 have this wonderful relationship. You feel like, this is something that could possibly last forever. It almost reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Requiem for a Dream, but the two characters, the love interests in that, there's a feeling of this kind of chaos of the world around them, but they're kind of insulated with their love before it all comes crashing down, kind of a thing. So that's really what I felt about this. And I really felt like you kind of know, you can feel this dread building in the background, right? You don't want to admit to yourself that anything bad could possibly happen because, dystopian societies always have happy endings, right? Unfortunately for them, O'Brien ends up double-crossing them because he is actually a member of the Thought Police, and they are surrounded, they are separated, and then Act 3 begins. And let me tell you, Act 3 is one horror show. Winston is tortured in a way that they describe in this book that it's like you're tortured with such finality from all sides that you not only wish you were dead, but you would do anything to make the pain go away, including give up your significant other, give up your family, give up your friends, give up everything, kind of turn them over to the Thought Police to be tortured just so you don't have to be tortured. I think about this experiment. I think it was in the 50s or 60s where somebody would be separated with a wall. I think if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments because I'm just kind of pulling this from memory, but they were separated by a wall and somebody had a red button and that would give the other person on the other side of the wall an electric shock. And it's like you'd be able to preserve yourself if you shock the other person. And the person would readily, through having their defenses worn down, shock the other person. So it just kind of gives you that idea of mind control that like when something is so when the motivation is enough, you are willing to give up even the people that you love the most. And that is the most horrifying thing. So yeah, where Winston and Julia end up at the end of the novel, where they have both kind of become the lemmings themselves, and they both reveal that they had given up each other to the party. Brutal stuff. It was very hard to read, you guys. So in closing, what I would say is, if you really like books that make you think, if you like books that portray a dystopian society, but in a way you might not have quite seen it before, if you're curious about 1984 because you've heard about it so much and you want to know, is the hype really, kind of warranted? I'm here to tell you, for all three, hell yes. This is one of those books that I think it actually underestimates, in my mind, how good it ended up being from reading it. When I first read it, I didn't know it would be that good. So I think it kind of beat the hype for me. And it's a book that is an important book, especially now, as all those themes I described earlier in the video end up becoming more and more commonplace as concerns for people. I think it's more than ever important that we educate ourselves on what's possible so we don't either repeat history or repeat fantasy, because in this case it might be a question of fantasy and history colliding. So I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. Let me know what you think of this review, trying different kind of formats and stuff to see what people enjoy, and let me know if you want more reviews of other books and any other genres or anything you'd like me to cover. Let me know what you thought of this review, what you like, what you didn't like. I always want to get better with each video as well. And if you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. It always helps out the channel. And please feel free to share it with your friends as well. And definitely pick up 1984. I think you will like it. It is not an easy read, but it is an important one. So be good to yourselves, be good to each other. I'll see you as always on the next video. Take care.